Just when you think your heart rate couldn't be raised enough, the Cincinnati Bengals, for the second week in a row, pull out an absolute stunner to get to 4-1 and are atop the AFC North division. Hey, everyone. How's it going? It's Anthony Cosenza with the Orange and Black Insider once again. And even though the Bengals have a handful of great wins already this season, they've got a big game coming up this Sunday in Week 6. We'll talk about that in just a second. I'm joined by my usual co-host, John Sheeran. John, I promise I wasn't mad at you last week, man.
I promise I didn't leave on purpose.
I don't know what happened there, but we missed you for the rest of the show. We got a couple of questions in from you to our other gentleman who joined us, and then about one comment in about the Falcons or Dolphins, and then you went bye-bye. So it's good to have you back, and hopefully no little Google demons will get you this time.
Hopefully not. Hopefully those guys at Google will not. Will leave me alone for the night.
Yeah, you must have pissed someone off at corporate or something. I don't know. Anyway, great to have you back. Obviously, exciting past couple of weeks for the Bengals, right?
Like they can't give us a break. We can't get a complete game, and I doubt we're going to get one this week, but we'll see.
Yeah, this one this Sunday should be incredibly interesting for a variety of reasons. AFC North battle, obviously a longtime rivalry with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and they host them. And it's kind of a who's who type of game. Yeah, a lot of things can still play out over the rest of the season, but it is a who's who kind of game. It is for AFC North dominance, all of that. And to help us preview the upcoming Week 6 Steelers at Bengals game, we have Brian Davis from Behind the Steel Curtain and their podcast over there through the SB Nation Podcast Network. Brian, thank you so much for joining us. How are you, sir?
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me. Great to be in the jungle.
Yeah. And good to have you in the jungle. I'm not in the jungle per se. I actually live in Southern California, so I'm not in the jungle per se. But John, my co-host, is definitely in.
We're about 3 miles outside the jungle, and as far as I'm concerned, the Steelers are extremely welcome in the jungle because they seem to do well here.
Very true. Brian, before we kind of jump into previewing the game, if you just want to tell our listeners a little bit about your background. Obviously, like I said, you're at Behind the Steel Curtain through the SB Nation Network. You run a podcast over there with your co-host, Anthony, who has a stellar first name. So tell us a little bit about that, how long you've been there, and if you live Steel City and how you became a fan, all that good stuff.
Well, I'm a Johnstown, PA native. So I grew up living and breathing Pittsburgh Steelers, especially I got into it in the late 70s when I was about 7 years old. So I was growing up during the Super Bowl dynasty era. So it's something that, they beat you up in gym class if you don't wear black and gold. So, I mean, it's something that I've just lived and breathed and just loved for years. But right now, I don't live in Pennsylvania. I actually live in the state of Maryland, which is so smack dab in the middle of Baltimore Raven territory.
I was going to say.
Here I am, and I'm the bad guy again, and I love it. And so I got involved with SB Nation about 3.5 years ago. And there was this, my daughter was in kindergarten at the time, and she had this little buddy at school that she always hung out with. And it was field day, and I got there, and the boy's dad was there, and I've seen him around, and he always wore Pittsburgh stuff. And so he came up to me and said, hey, what do you think about the Steelers this year? And I said, well, it's June. But I'm like, you know what? I read an article today. I absolutely loved it. I'm really excited about the season because they're talking about it now. He goes, yeah, I wrote that article. Like, you gotta be kidding me. What do you mean you wrote that article? Here it was Jeff Hartman, editor of Behind the Steel Curtain. And 6 days later, my first article appeared. And I've been on ever since. About 2 years ago, I started Factor Fiction, which I'm no longer doing that podcast, but I would do the Steeler Hangover with Jeff, and now with Anthony Defio. I go ahead and do the Steeler Hangover on Monday nights, and we do the preview show on Thursday evenings with Jeff. So I've been doing that. I do a few articles a week, and I try to do more satire, more fun. And, I'll do bold and bizarre predictions before the game. One will be your typical prediction. James Conner will run for 100 yards or whatever. And then I'll go ahead with, at halftime, Le'Veon Bell will appear on the Jumbotron doing his new song, Bloated, when I should be loaded, or something like that. So, I mean, I have a lot of fun with it, but I love my team, and I respect this North Division.
Well, it's good to have you with us. Good to have another SB Nation brother, so to speak, on the show. And I know of Jeff from afar, and I know he's really carried the baton well from Neil Coulong, who used to run behind the steel curtain. So definitely give him our kudos for the work that you guys do over there. Let's just start off with it. It's been kind of a Jekyll and Hyde start for the Pittsburgh Steelers, Brian, to say the least. Start off with a tie against the Browns. Now, the Browns seem to be an improved team, which we thought they would be. Start off the season with a tie with the Browns. You have a loss against the Ravens, and then you come back this week and have a kind of a real statement win against the Falcons. I think the Falcons are deceiving now, 1-4 in my book. But your take on the start of the Steelers, and are they kind of starting? Does this game last week kind of make you believe that they're starting to gain that typical Steelers momentum that we see kind of mid-season, late season, after sometimes a sluggish start?
You know what I really think you do, and I made this comment with Tony on our podcast the other day, that you might possibly look back on that long pass from Ben Roethlisberger to Antonio Brown, that bomb that made the score 34-17, as possibly the turning point of the season. Because this has been a tale of two Bens. We're either getting road Ben, which we usually get, but now we're getting road Ben at home, where he has just been playing absolutely awful at times and then shows some stretches of brilliance. So it's really going to live and die right now on the arm of Ben Roethlisberger, because you're needing to see at least 350 yards out of him and maybe 3 touchdown passes with just the state of the Steeler defense. Because right now they look good against a very good Atlanta offense, but that defense is ranked at the bottom of the league for a reason, because they're not good right now. The scheming is bad, and they just need to pull it together. And I don't think that this team has ever been the same since December 4th of last year at Paul Brown Stadium, when Ryan Shazier went down, because that defense lost the heart of it at that point. And they've been, I don't know the exact record, but 5-6 or 5-5 since.
Well, Shazier, obviously a very, very good football player, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of those facets in just a little bit. But there's a lot of different areas that we could go to, and I don't want to steal my co-host thunder here, but I guess it's a good segue into the Ben Roethlisberger Antonio Brown connection this year. This is a duo that has been incredibly prolific over the past couple of years. Obviously, there's some issues to start the season. Antonio Brown kind of seems a little upset. Has a big game last week. But then after the big game, there's kind of some other off-field stuff that comes about. I guess talk a little bit about Antonio Brown, his start to the season, his game last week, and what should be ahead for him.
You know what? Sometimes I don't know whether I am watching Pittsburgh Steelers football or Days of Our Lives. Because this is team turmoil. And yeah, you've been there. You've had a guy like Ocho Cinco over the years. And you know that diva receiver. We definitely have a diva receiver. We love him, but AB is a diva. And he's the kind of guy that he is not completely happy unless he is getting the ball. He wants to be the focal point. He wants to be the guy that is leading the league and the showcase player. So you have a guy like Juju coming along, Juju Smith-Schuster, who is stealing a lot of his thunder. And he is a hit in Pittsburgh. They absolutely love him there. And he's playing. He's playing well, and he's getting the targets, but not all the targets that AB wants to have. So, you have a little bit of that. I was at the game in week 2 when Ben Roethlisberger scored to tie the game up and, get closer against the Kansas City Chiefs, and AB sulked. Antonio walked off the field. Was really upset about it. Next thing you know, On Monday, he doesn't show up. He's had a chip on his shoulder for the last 6-8 months. Everybody's trying to figure out what that is. He's been arguing with the press. Here's a guy that is jolly and happy-go-lucky, and then all of a sudden he seems dead inside all of a sudden. So we don't know what's going on mentally with him. And now with the news that's coming out right now of the possible lawsuit because of trashing a condo in Miami and throwing stuff out the window, which is, I don't know what's going on, but I just know that it's week after week. It's drama, and then more drama. And just when you thought you saved the drama for your mama, more drama. I mean, it just keeps happening in Pittsburgh. So it's the return of team turmoil. And here you go with Antonio Brown. So the big thing is he wants his targets, but he's one of the most targeted wide receiver in the National Football League. But when they connect, they seem better. And those 2 touchdown passes and the fact that that they seem to just really gel in that Week 5 game, it could really be a turning point. But one thing in defense of Antonio Brown, he had 13 targets the other day against Atlanta, which that is not a great defense. And they had a lot of guys hurt on that defense. 13 targets, only caught 7 of them. Those other 6 targets that he missed, not his fault. Ben overthrew him, underthrew him, didn't even get near him. I mean, he could have, if they were even close to him, could have been 13 for 13. I'm a Ben guy, but Ben was off. I know he's coming out and saying, my elbow was hurt. I needed to suck it up. But Ben's a drama guy too. He's a guy that is better when he's ticked off. He's better when when you think he's out and you're counting him out. He's kind of that cowboy in a Western now, that crazy cowboy. So, you never know week to week. We just want a win and a silent week here in Pittsburgh, and just does not seem to be happening the last couple of years.
So you talked about, obviously Antonio is getting the ball thrown at him at, it's still at, a high rate. And it's not the lack of targets that's the problem. It might just be the way that the ball is getting to them. And, when watching Hard Knocks, one of my favorite guys to watch is Todd Haley. And Haley's been with the Steelers through Antonio Brown's, great years. And then, he left for Cleveland, and then you guys replaced him, kind of like what the Bengals did when they replaced Hugh Jackson. You replaced them with your quarterback coach, Randy Fitchner, who was with the team for a long time. Do you think that a lot of the now, obviously, the disconnect between Roethlisberger and Brown is, it can't be traced to just on the field performance. Like no quarterback wide receiver duo has more incompletions as the quarterback's fault than Roethlisberger and Brown. Do you think, though, that the transition from Haley to Fitchner has been, rough to say the least, and could be, one of the main factors behind the disconnect we've seen from the offense?
Randy actually discovered Antonio Brown at Central Michigan. So he scouted him. There's really not a disconnect there. But, I'm going to correct you in something. The offensive coordinator in Pittsburgh is not Randy. It's Ben Roethlisberger. He was handpicked by Ben Roethlisberger. So there wasn't even a search. When that happened in January, it wasn't a search. Todd Haley and Ben Roethlisberger never got along. And it seems like I'm just pounding on Ben. But Ben wanted Roethlisberger gone when the coordinator that should have been gone was on the defensive side of the ball, Keith Butler. This is a guy that led an offense, the coach an offense, that put 42 up on the great Jacksonville defense of last year in the playoffs. I mean, Haley is a good coach. He was just never the guy in Pittsburgh. Kind of ran out of town, but same organization that ran Bruce Arians out of town. But the bottom line to the whole thing is Ben and Todd Haley never got along, and you saw it more. It really helped destroy the team. The famous Jesse James non-catch touchdown against New England. That entire time when they were supposed to be planning a play, getting ready, they wouldn't even go near each other on the sideline. They weren't planning anything. Ben threw an interception, but they were completely out of sync because they weren't even talking at that point. So they never got along. Randy was Ben's quarterback coach for years, and that's the guy he handpicked. So like I said, the joke is that Ben's the offensive coordinator and Randy's just there. But Randy's also a guy that went to college along with, coached in college along with Keith Butler with Mike Tomlin. So they go back a long way. I've seen him do some decent things this year as well. So I'm not completely down on it. I just thought Todd Haley was sent out of town for no good reason. Now, you mentioned Antonio Brown. He went over and hugged Todd Haley during that Cleveland game. That that was something that they were still awfully close. Antonio Brown, his problems with Randy is just the fact that he's just not getting the ball enough. And what's happening, the other problem is Ben is trying to get the ball to him in situations you saw in the Cleveland game, like when he's triple covered. He's still forcing the ball into him when he has other options because he's trying to keep the guy happy. And sometimes I'm wondering if he's just throwing it to him out of spite. It's just a crazy situation. Like I said, it's team turmoil. There's a lot of me, and there needs to be team. And I think that's going to start coming together as we go. And there's the other big elephant in the room. And I mentioned elephant because we just saw him on a jet ski in Florida. It's Le'Veon Bell is hanging over the head of this team too. And that is another thing that's causing so much turmoil in the locker room. They're just not together. In fact, I think the entire team needs a lockout, maybe a lock in, maybe a Chuck E. Cheese or Dave and Buster's, and just go hang out and play video games for the night. They just need to somehow kind of gel and get on the same page. But I'm still thinking that touchdown pass the other day might be the turning point that might just get them back together. And going into week 6 against a team like Cincinnati, if you go in to their house where they have struggled over the years, beat a 4-1 team, if you can pull that off, then 2 more division games right after that, and you could have the complete season turned around at that point. So that's what the hope is in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, and the hope for the Bengals is that whenever Pittsburgh comes to town, Bengals fans are pretty used to seeing whoever's playing quarterback getting sacked multiple times because for whatever reason, Pittsburgh does a great job of disguising blitzes and creating, fantastic pressure packages. I'm talking about mostly in the Dick LeBeau days. Obviously, he's long gone now. The Steelers, we saw them, get to Matt Ryan a little bit. TJ Watt had, I think, 3 sacks coming off that right edge of the offensive line. Obviously, Bengals have a weakness there. Do you see that you said that, that touchdown for Antonio Brown could get the offense, get back going? Do you see that game against the Falcons being a way as like a rejuvenation of the pass rush to potentially, kind of lead your defense, back to, at least adequacy? Because obviously the secondary has issues, but the Bengals have had trouble defending, the Steelers pass rush in the past.
The best answer that I can provide right now is it depends. And it depends on the scheme. Because that Baltimore game on Sunday night, Chris Collinsworth was in the booth saying, why aren't they rushing? I mean, they're not even trying to rush. And if you just put a little pressure on Flacco, that's a completely different game. But I don't think they were believing in their defensive backs at the time. And the thing in Pittsburgh, the pass rush gives any team gives the defensive backs more time to cover. So that's the big thing. We finally got Cam Hayward going. Cam Hayward had 2 sacks in that game. As long as the scheme is the pass rush, they will have more success in giving a guy like Joe Hayden, who had an amazing game against Julio Jones and had a good game against AJ Green in week 6 or 7 last year in Pittsburgh. And, that's the hope and that's the big matchup to watch. If Hayden could keep up with AJ Green, they have a chance to turn that defense around. But like you said, it does start with that pass rush to get everything going.
Talking with Brian Davis at Behind the Steel Curtain and their podcast through the SB Nation family of podcasts, which this podcast is actually a part of as well. So we're a nice little tight-knit family here. And Brian is advocating for the Steelers to have a kumbaya moment at Dave & Buster's, which just sounds like fun in general. So, they could use it. Brian, we could talk about the Le'Veon Bell thing. I think that's been beaten to death. I don't really want to go there. James Conner has filled in. There's been some peaks and valleys there. I guess where I want to go with this is how confident are you that this Steelers team is going to turn things around for good? I mean, I can remember back in that 05 season, they were basically out of the playoff picture, I think, towards the end of that season. They rattled off 4 wins to finish the season and then 4 straight postseason wins. They went 8-0, I think, that year. We know they finished strong. That's what this team does. To me, I think this is an elite franchise that knows how to win, knows how to build a team, and just they have continuity at the head coach, all of that. But this year, the head coach has come under scrutiny. You said there's a lot of me-first people in that locker room that's showing a little bit in terms of the performance. How confident are you down the stretch, whether Bell comes back or not or what have you, how confident are you that this Steelers team is going to put their foot on the gas pedal, turn things around, and be that usual 10-win team that we see year in and year out?
Can I cop out and say cautiously optimistic?
Okay.
I kind of have that feeling, and I'm not a homer, because actually the last 3 weeks I picked against them. I picked against them against Tampa, I picked against them against Baltimore, and I picked against them last week. But I'm feeling that I had that aha moment with that pass, and that game just felt like it was an awakening. So we've seen it before with Mike Tomlin teams. It seems like just when you think that he should be on the chopping block, that he puts it together. And that team did it last year. They were 3-2, but that loss against Jacksonville in week 5 was just absolutely devastating. And then they turn around and they didn't lose again until week 16. It was like December 17th against New England. In that Jesse James game that we talked about, they didn't lose again. They finished 13-3, but they're a team that, despite the team turmoil tag, they somehow get it together. And I just have that gut feeling that it's going to happen again, but it hinges on week 6. If it doesn't happen in week 6, this could be a completely different situation, because you're looking at a 5-1 Cincinnati team at that point, and you're sitting at 2-3-1. And that might not be good enough even to get a wild card at this point.
Right, and half their division games already in the rear view at that point at 2-3-1, because you played and tied Cleveland, you lost to Baltimore, and then if you do lose to Cincinnati, I mean that's not a good way to start the divisional games. John, you had another question for him.
Yeah, so I guess kind of following off of that, would you, when regarding Mike Tomlin, do you contribute him as the guy who, kind of lets these things drag out during the season, or more as the guy that brings people together, late in the season for a turnaround? Is he more on the side that, creates disaster, the side that kind of solves it, I guess?
You know what? I don't have a great answer for that, because, one thing that I complain about is fostering a atmosphere with no discipline whatsoever. But it seems like they do a lot of stuff in-house. If you watch his press conferences, there's a lot of no comments. He mentioned today or yesterday that, I didn't even know about the Antonio Brown situation, when you knew that he did. He handles situations. We saw it last year around this time, right after the Cincinnati game, the first Cincinnati game, the victory in Heinz Field. They had Martavis Bryant, was ripping on teammates and tweeting and not showing up, and sat him down for a week. And the rest of the season, Martavis Bryant was on point and not a problem in the locker room. So that's a hard one to answer. I think he's a little too loose at times, but it seems internally that he helps pull everything together. So I know that's a wishy-washy answer, but there's something going on to continue to win year after year, when the guy's worst seasons were 2 seasons of 8-8.
Yeah. And that's the Steelers' MO. Like I said, they're constantly in the playoff picture, playoff hunt, all of that. Brian, we've gone a little longer with you than expected, but it's been a pleasure, because you've brought immense knowledge and all of that. So I apologize for taking up so much time this evening, but we appreciate your insight. I guess we'll just close with this. Your big keys to the game on Sunday and how you see it playing out. I'm going to rewind to something you said just a couple minutes ago about the Joe Hayden, AJ Green thing. That's been a matchup that has been a battle since Hayden joined the league, along with Green as a top 10 pick in 2011. There was some really good battles when he was on a terrible Cleveland team against AJ Green. So I agree with you that being one of the keys, but your kind of keys to the game and your prediction as to how this goes. The Bengals are 0-6 the last 6 contests against the Steelers.
Well, Joe Hayden's number 1. Number 2 is that offensive line of Pittsburgh, trying to solve Dunlap and Atkins. That's the bottom line. If they could give Ben time, they're going to do so much better as far as an offense. So it comes down to the offensive line. The fans love Alejandro Villanueva, but he could be up and down. So that's a huge concern there and it's good offensive line, but they need to hold up. And the third key is James Conner. James Conner needs 30 carries, and 150, 175 yards total, not on the ground, but through the air. And that's something where he's been doing very well in place of Le'Veon Bell. He did not have that in the past, and he's brought that aspect to his game as a very good pass catcher and a very good blocker in the backfield. That was Le'Veon Bell's MO. So James is filling in nicely. And just in defense of James real quick, when he was not running well, those games, they were down 21-0, 17-0 early in those games. And you're not running the ball, and he's going to have a bad stat line. But when he's on, he's been very good with 2 100-yard seasons this year. But thanks so much, fellas, for having me. I am very long-winded, so I will apologize for that.
No.
Probably go without a breath for another 5 minutes if I needed to.
No, you're good. It wasn't an indictment on you. We just it's a big week. I mean, we have a lot of questions. We have a lot to talk about. This is a huge game, and unfortunately for Bengals fans, this is kind of usually our season's version of a Super Bowl or a playoff game is against the Steelers. That's just usually how it goes. And this week is no exception. The Bengals got off to a better start than a lot of people figured. Pittsburgh is still right in the hunt, but they've been up and down a little bit. So this is a big game, and the Bengals just have not fared well against the Steelers in the Marvin Lewis era. They do well against the Browns. They do well against the Ravens. They just cannot figure out a way to beat Pittsburgh. So this is a big game for both teams going forward in terms of their season. We appreciate it. Again, this is Brian Davis with Behind the Steel Curtain and their podcast. Are you on Twitter, Brian? Did you mention that at the beginning of the show?
Yeah, no, I did not, but I am finally on Twitter, and it is BTSC BAD, because you mentioned my podcast partner. I go by Brian Anthony Davis. So
okay.
BTSC BAD, and I have all 48 followers right now. So let's try to beef that up over 50.
Is your middle name Anthony?
Yes, Brian Anthony Davis.
Oh my gosh, 2 Anthonys on a Steelers podcast, and then you're on with an Anthony here. It's sorry, John, you're the outsider, buddy. Thanks again, Brian. Appreciate it. And everybody go check out his stuff. Enjoy the game this Sunday, Brian. I'm sure it'll be pretty, but it'll be ugly, I'm sure.
Yeah, and that's been the history of Pittsburgh, Cincinnati for as long as I can remember. So as much as I fear it sometimes, I love it too. That's real football.
Yep. Well, enjoy it. And yeah, we enjoyed having you on, buddy. Thanks,
fellas. See ya.
All right. That was Brian Davis with Behind the Steel Curtain. Awesome guy, and brought the knowledge. Great show that he does. I listened to a little bit of it as I asked him to join our program. And if you're looking for a Steelers fan to actually like and buy a beer for and all of that, Brian seems to be that kind of guy. He's a nice guy, and we appreciate it. And we were talking before the show, John, and he was saying that, he's got respect for the Bengals and all that kind of stuff. So we got to give him a little props on that.
Yeah.
So, John, we are, I guess from here, we should, since we just had Brian on, we should give our takes a little bit on previewing the Steelers game. Then we can backtrack a little bit, talk about the exciting game against the Dolphins and some other things. Before I do, This is going to be a segment in just a minute. But I want to ask you, and this may be a little bit of a surprise to you, John, but I want to ask you and our live listeners, as well as those who maybe catch the podcast afterward, if you want to give us some of your comments on this. I have kind of a unique question I've been thinking about over the past couple of weeks, and it goes hand in hand with Vontaze Burfict returning to the lineup. Basically, Marvin Lewis has been looking for kind of his next Ray Lewis type of linebacker, and he's had him, he's thought he's had him in a lot of different forms. But it's been a lot of what could have been, and that includes Burfict. So, John, the question I have for you, and you can marinate on it for a few minutes, but and for the listeners here, basically I had 3 linebackers that were major what could have been based on injury, leaving the team, personal issues, whatever. Takeo Spikes, when Marvin Lewis came over in 2003, he tried to talk Takeo Spikes into staying into Cincinnati. He was an impending free agent. And unfortunately, Spikes didn't stay. So there's a major what could have been there. He I think made a Pro Bowl or 2 with a couple of other teams. Mm-hmm. And then you have Odell Thurman, was a borderline Pro Bowl player his 1 year in 2005. Thought that was a guy. Total mess of a human being from there.
Yeah.
Right? I think he had 5 picks, and I mean his rookie season was insane. So there's a lot of what could have been there. And then you've got Vontaze Burfict, who was an undrafted free agent and the biggest success story, I guess, of the 3, because kind of a rags to riches thing, made a Pro Bowl, but oh my gosh, injuries, suspensions, all that kind of stuff. It seems as if he could have been a perennial Pro Bowl player if he wasn't either in his own way or hurt himself. Mm-hmm. So I want you to think about those 3 in terms of, yes, there's more ahead for Vontaze Burfict, but who could have been or who will be or whatever the best linebacker in the what could have been linebacker group of those 3. So keep that in the back of your mind. We're going to talk about the Steelers, but that's kind of our question of the night. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I got it.
I know, a lot there. I'm rambling a little bit, but I just randomly thought of those 3, and I was like, Marvin Lewis has always been looking for his linebacker. He thinks he's got him, and then they don't. So we'll get to that in a sec. John, the Bengals take on the Steelers. We just had Brian Davis on to preview the game. One thing I didn't get to ask him, I said I was gonna, but I forgot. It's been a long week already. I kind of want to start with this because we didn't address it with him. There's a lot of smack talk, again, going on this week. And I saw on your Twitter, you had a colorful comment about some comments by Bud Dupree. I got a good laugh out of that, buddy, by the way. But for those who don't know, Bud Dupree essentially said, and I do want to refer you to my colleague's Twitter account to get his commentary on it. But basically, he said with the Ryan Shazier injury last year in that game towards the end of the season, which Ryan Shazier made a poor form tackle and hurt himself. Nobody cheap shot at him or hurt him or anything like that from the Bengals. Essentially, and correct me if I'm wrong, John, Bud Dupree said, well, once Ryan Shazier went out, we kind of went headhunting or injury hunting for the Bengals in that first half until we kind of figured out, oh, actually it was an accident. So there's that on the Steelers side. That's a new one. Then you have Carlos Dunlap today talking about, and this is just more funny.
Yeah.
You have Carlos Dunlap talking today about the new quarterback sack rules, the tackling rules, all that stuff. And he basically referred to Ben Roethlisberger as a 300-pound quarterback, obviously referring to his weight and not in a flattering form. So already the noise is starting to talk, starting to pick up this week. Already you can I saw a thing on Behind the Steel Curtain about like, oh, Ben is kind of letting bygones be bygones in terms of the chippiness of the last few games, all that kind of stuff. Do you expect this game to – I mean, if you remember last year in that primetime game, that was a bloodbath. I mean, that was an absolute – Joe Mixon got hurt. Ryan Shazier got hurt. I mean, guys were just going down left and right, and you could tell by the way guys were hitting each other. Mm. Do you expect that kind of game again? And not saying people are going to let up on the brakes or anything, but do you expect a 1 p.m. Eastern game to be that way? Is that just where this rivalry has gone mudslinging, guys talking about intentionally hurting other players on the other team, and all kinds of other things. Is that just where we're at, I guess, with this rivalry?
I guess until they prove that it's not, then it is. And part of that is something that I've been very adamant about ever since that game in December, is that no one seems to want to be the bigger man. And partly because, the Bengals team, organization, fan base culture is that we've always been the little brother in the rivalry, and how the Steelers don't see it as a rivalry because they can just come in to Paul Brown Stadium and win 90% of the time. So it was the sense of, we finally have a guy in Burfict who can hit him back, and we're not going to feel sorry about it. And then the Steelers kicked it up a notch from their perspective because of it. And now it's just, back and forth, karma's happening all the time. And that it makes me honestly sick, because the game isn't about, matchups or, which team is better than the other. It's just about which team can hurt the other the most. And
yeah, how many stars could get off on the gurney? You know what I mean?
Right.
Come on.
And what I was hoping for after, the game in December was some interference from the league office or from the refs of saying, hey, we're not going to put up with this anymore. We're going to crack down. And if any more BS starts to happen, there's going to be some major consequences because of it. We've heard none of that. As far as I'm concerned, this is good from the NFL's perspective, because it's something that people talk about, regardless of player safety, because this is the most unsafe game of the year, and it happens twice a year, and it's ridiculous. So, yeah, if it was in prime time, obviously, I think it would be a lot worse, because obviously there's more implications on that, and there's obviously more eyes watching. But this game is a huge, barometer as to how both teams have grown since that day. And I just want, I don't care if it's the Bengals, I don't care if it's the Steelers. I just want one team to step up and just be the bigger person in this relationship, so we can just focus on the good things in football, not the bad things in football. And the bad things in football is injuries. And it's this thing that we should not want to see, regardless of what happened in the past. Plenty of Bengals fans want to see Juju Smith-Schuster injured, and I just think it's sick. And I just don't like that attitude regarding this game, and I want it to stop. And until it does stop, I just can't expect that it will. Right.
And, that's my thing about it. And I think, you see stuff, if you're on Instagram or social media, you see these guys, they after the game, they a lot of times they trade jerseys, even though they're rivals and all that, and they take a picture with each other, and, they're buddies, some of them. I think Carlos Dunlap, I forget, is it Reuben Foster or someone? Not Reuben Foster.
Ramon Foster.
Ramon Foster, excuse me. Yes.
Yeah.
I think it was either he or somebody else on that offensive line went to Florida with him. So they're buddies from their Florida days. I mean, these guys know each other. They play, but this game just has and I think it really, I don't know when you could say, you could say the Carson Palmer injury was the one that did it. You could say the wild card game a couple of years ago was the one, but it's just taken on a life of its own. And, like you said, people wanting to see Juju hurt, I think that's ridiculous. But I do think that, playing physical, the Steelers have always, every time they win these games, the Steelers have essentially, I like to use the term, out-physicaled the Bengals. Yeah. They have, and whether that's by intimidation by hurting players, or attrition by hurting players, or by pounding the football and just being, the 3 yards cloud of dust and grind out a win type of thing. I could go back to the Jerome Bettis days if you want to go back that far. They had just been more physical than the Bengals, and they've exuded a more physical attitude than the Bengals. And that, to me, is the difference in this series, between Marvin Lewis and his days with the Bengals. I would rather see the Bengals come out with that intensity or whatever, but like you said, it's a fine line to walk. I think someone in our chat room called it controlled aggression. Was it Greg or who was that? That said that? Carl Benson. Old school football. Hopefully, no ejections on the Bengals side. Controlled aggression, but we saw this thing, and I don't want to harp on this whole thing. It's just a major storyline, John.
Right.
You go back to that wild card game. You saw coaches pulling Reggie Nelson's hair. You saw Joey Porter on the field and goading guys, and there's just things that in this series have gotten out of control and gotten out of hand. And I think, to your point, the desire of injuries for certain players, I mean, that's just ridiculous. And I don't really want to talk too much about that, but the bulletin board material is out, I guess, is where I'm going with this, right?
Right. And to your point, when it was Mike Munchak who pulled Reggie Nelson's dreads, it was Joey Porter antagonizing players on the field. I feel like it's right that from our perspective that we can hate that and we can say, hey, why aren't they punished for that? But they feel the confidence to do that because they can just beat us however they want to. And instead of the Bengals, stepping up their game and just beating them, old-fashioned way, they've taken the approach that, hey, we just need to be the bigger bully. But at the same time, when it's happened, they still haven't gotten any good results. So from their perspective, they're still the top dog, and that won't change until they can just beat them in just a new way that hasn't been done before, and just beat them fair and square. Just straight up outplay them. Just straight up outplay a team that you're better than, you're better on paper than, you're better talent-wise. Just don't stoop to their level. Just be the bigger man in the situation, and things will eventually change.
It's a great point, because it's almost like, and it's an old football adage, it's almost like when you see a lot of personal fouls, right? Who's the guy that gets caught? It's the second guy, right? It's not the guy who initially does the little subtle jab or a face mask pull or whatever. It's the guy who gets pissed off and retaliates, and it's right there out in the open. And the refs are there to see it. It's kind of like the Steelers do that stuff, like, come on, and then finally the Bengals explode.
Yeah,
it either costs them on the field or by penalties or all kinds of stuff. You mentioned beating them. Okay, you mentioned beating them in a specific way, outplaying them. How confident are you in this year's team if they are down on their home field, like they were last week against the Dolphins, if they are down in that fashion in the second half against the rival Steelers, a team that has largely owned them? How confident are you in this year's team based on their comeback ability? How confident are you that they could do it again against a team like the Steelers? Or is the psyche just too fragile there still?
I guess we're going to find out. I guess, before this season, I would have told you like a 1 out of 10. Now I'll give you like a 4 or 5, just because there's a certain level of grit that we've seen from the Colts game, from the Falcons game, from the Dolphins game. Three fourth quarter comebacks don't just happen. And obviously there's a level of luck in there, but there's just a different, there's this different level of, I don't know if it's like grit or just tenacity or just the ability to close games out. And when it comes to Steel, like the Bengals blew a 17-point lead against the Steelers last year because they just, took their foot off the gas. I don't think that that's something that we could, just expect this year based off what we've seen before. And if they're down 17 to the Steelers, they're not going to be the team that takes their foot off the gas on the road against the division rival. So I would say that, because the Bengals should, beat the Steelers based off talent alone, I would give them more of a chance now than I would have before the season began, just because of the results that they've shown so far this season.
Okay, so no, by all indications, and again, it's still, for those of you who download this podcast later in the week, the first injury report came out on Wednesday. It looks as if no Giovanni Bernard. Clint Bowling didn't participate in Wednesday's practice. He's been the most steady offensive lineman. That's not a good sign. Tyler Kroft, a foot issue that forced him out last week. He kind of came back in. We'll see what happens with him. Didn't practice. Looks like Billy Price is out. We don't know about John Ross. How does that affect your opinion of the Bengals' chances in this game?
Bowling's obviously the biggest one, because if Bowling doesn't go, then it's probably going to be Christian Westerman, who, we all love as a potential starter, but to replace Bowling, those are big shoes to fill. And he's going up against, Stephon Tuitt, Cameron Haywood, Javon Hargrove, 3 very talented guys who have always given the Bengals fits when they're trying to run the ball up the middle. If they don't have Gio again, I'm fine with giving Mixon, another 20 touches, but based off what we saw from last week when he had minimal success running the ball up the middle against the Dolphins in the first half, they got to get more creative. They got to do more of the things that they did in the second half, where Mixon had a lot more success running out of spread formations. And I think they can scheme around, losing Bowling but it obviously won't be easy to do. The Ross subtraction from the lineup was very noticeable against the Dolphins in that first half, because as you saw, like, when you didn't have that, when you didn't have Ross stretching the field, it was tougher for Boyd to create separation underneath. Obviously, Green had a great day because he's AJ Green and he can stretch the field on his own. But it's just, even when Ross isn't getting the ball, he's still impacting the defense. He's still putting stress on the safeties playing deep. He's still putting stress on those corners who are playing deep zone. And the Steelers are one of the most zone heavy cover teams in the league. So obviously, Ross's impact will obviously impact them as well. I wouldn't expect Ross to produce a lot if he goes for the Steelers, especially because he's coming off injury, but he does affect, the production of Boyd, the production of Dalton in ways that, sometimes isn't always noticeable.
Yeah, it's the defensive focus thing, and you're absolutely right. I noticed it. Second quarter, I noticed it last week against Miami, where Green's bracketed, and luckily some good throws by Dalton and some very nice catches by Green, kind of a combo there, led to his big day. And then Tyler Boyd, really had one big play. I think it was like a 31-yarder, a nice play. But other than that, was kept in check after a really nice start to the season. So, yeah, hopefully, then you don't have Eifert either. Yeah. That's another guy that takes away attention. So, they got to start to get all hands on deck. Quick question, and then we'll get your prediction, and then we'll move on, John. And this may just be a quick answer from you. I mean, is Joe Mixon just simply a back that gets better as the game goes on and gets more carries? Seems to start off slow, seems to, kind of grind out some tough yards early on, and then as the game wears on, he gets more touches. He almost seems to get stronger. Is that me, or is that just an illusion and a fake adage in NFL football, if you will?
I want to say it's the latter, because I don't know if there's specific analytics that can back that up. Obviously, logically, it kind of makes sense. The more touches that you get, the more feel you have running the ball. But I want to point to the Colts game, where they kind of just ran with Mixon throughout the game, and from the start, he looked fresh as hell, and he's getting successful runs after successful runs. I think the best example of this is what Todd McVay is doing out in Los Angeles with Todd Gurley, who's running against, I think, like 90% of the runs have come out 11 personnel, and he's had like 91% of his runs have been with a box advantage, and that's kind of just like the prototype offensive scheme to run the ball in the NFL now. And obviously Todd Gurley is the most successful running back in the NFL right now. So it's something that every team should emulate, and there's no reason why the Bengals shouldn't also do that. And it would also help Mixon, get going a lot more earlier, because, the running the ball is mainly just a numbers game. It's mainly about having that advantage in the box. It's mainly about, giving the illusion that, you're spread out, spreading the defense out horizontally, and then gashing up the middle. And when Mixon had successful runs against the Dolphins, that's exactly what happened. It just so happened that they finally started to do that late in the game. So I think it's more that it's an illusion, but also it's mainly predicated on scheme.
Yeah, I think it's probably a little bit of both. I do think that there are guys that just as you get more carries, especially at the running back position, you just get into a groove and you start gelling with your offensive line, and I think that's just part of it. But
and it's the energy from Mixon that he also gives off to his offense line that late in the game it can give you an edge. So
yeah, totally. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. You can get this show on Stitcher, iTunes, YouTube, CincyJungle.com. We're on Google Play and Art19. So get the show where you can. We're going to get to some listener questions in a second. We've got a jam-packed show. We had Brian Davis on from Behind the Steel Curtain to help us preview the Steelers game. We are still talking Steelers. We're going to wrap a bow on it right now. John, your prediction for this game? I don't know where to go with it, to be honest with you.
I have to go first. All right.
I can go first, and I'll say
No. I'll go. God, I don't know why we're favored based off all the history with this, but I do think that it'll probably go down to like 1 point the spread, because I think right now it's 2.5. I'm gonna say they win. I'm gonna say they win, not off a game-winning field goal. I'm gonna say off a defensive stand. It'll probably be something like it might be a lot of field goals, maybe like 26-23. Bullock has like a busy day from a lot of inside the 40 yards if they can't finish in the red zone. I do think that the Steelers defense is vulnerable. despite having a rekindled pass rush against Atlanta. I don't know, man. I think that with playing the best team in the AFC a week after this, this is something that the Bengals can't afford to drop, because I think it'll be a lot harder to face the Chiefs at Arrowhead Stadium than the Steelers on their home turf, 1 o'clock. I think they come out with a win, and I'm kind of going against my gut, but that's just the way it is right now.
Yeah, it's almost a gut versus heart pick. And for those of you who do not know, John is referring to the next week against the Kansas City Chiefs, obviously undefeated right now, playing very well. And that game got flexed to Sunday night, where the Bengals just have not played well. That's next week, though. Right now is the Steelers. I think, like you said, I think it's critical if the Bengals want to make the playoffs, that they get out of this stretch, this 2-game stretch, at least 1-1.
Mm-hmm.
They need to get one of these games, because you can't afford to drop a division game, and you can't afford to drop 2 conference games. And then all of a sudden you're sitting there at 4-3 after starting 4-1. That's like a big difference.
Yeah.
Especially if you lose to Pittsburgh and they do start hitting their stride. I'm going to say this, and this may be a little bit of a cop-out. I think if most or all of those names I mentioned earlier on the injury report do not play, I think the Bengals lose. It'll probably be a hard-fought game. It'll probably be pretty close. But if they're missing arguably their best offensive lineman, their utility running back, obviously Tyler Eifert's out. If John Ross doesn't play, if all those guys are out, that's a pretty large mountain to overcome against a team that you just have traditionally not fared well against. I will say if most of those guys are back, I think it's a barely Bengals win. I think it's probably a 23-21 or 24-21 or something to that effect, that they can get past the Steelers. I'm definitely not so confident about the week after that, but that's a whole nother show. My prediction is predicated on some ifs, and those ifs are health. We're going to get to some listener questions in a little bit. We're running up against some time. You can text us for the time being. 949-542-6241 is the number. We've already got text. We got text yesterday, John. So people are excited about this week. So for now, text us. We're going to try and get some calls on the line. We're just running up against time a little bit. We still want to talk about the Dolphins, and we still want to try and get some questions here. And we have the question of the night. John, have you had time to think about my question of the night about the linebackers? Again, if you're just joining us, or if you, God forbid, fast forwarded through portions of this podcast, I asked a question of the night, and I'm going to give you some of our live listener responses too. Basically, who would have been the best in the what could have been linebackers for the Bengals? I had Takeo Spikes, who left before the 2003 season, so Marvin Lewis never got to coach him in this renaissance. We have Odell Thurman, who had an outstanding rookie season in 2005, but basically couldn't get on the field from there because of drug, alcohol, and all kinds of other personal issues. Then you have Vontaze Burfict, who's been the most statistically productive of the three, but has missed an immense amount of time with injuries, suspensions, and things like that. So, John, who was kind of the what could have been the best, what could have been linebacker? Who would have had the biggest impact based on their circumstances if we're wiping the slate clean?
All right, so Spikes. Now a few shows back, I talked about Brian Simmons and how I loved him, and he kind of played around the same time or a little bit after Takeo. Takeo was a little bit before my time. I never really got to see him at his prime when I was really following, because I just started following early 2000s. I always knew him as he had a big neck. That was the one thing I knew about him. And I feel like Thurman had the best combination of athleticism and tenacity, and he was kind of playing at the tail end of that old school era of football. That like the late 2000s was kind of like the end of running backs getting 300 carries a season or something like that, and it was before the explosion of the passing game. And my God, man, he just flew around the field. And when he went out, obviously the defense drastically dwindled. They were giving up a lot of explosive plays and whatnot. And I just feel like he had the biggest potential over a guy like Burfict, who never was quite the athlete that Thurman was. And Thurman was productive. He could do basically everything. and he was just kind of playing at the right time for linebackers, to be physical in the middle of the field. Obviously, what he did off the field was inexcusable, and I have no, I don't, what he did was bad. But I'm just saying, strictly on the field, I feel like he was probably the best combination of all three, and the time was kind of right for him to really elevate the Bengals defense to a much higher level than they were in the Carson Palmer era.
Yeah, and he wasn't the biggest guy, but he could tackle and he could make those big wow turnovers and wow plays. Unfortunately, we only saw it for a year. I do want to throw in an asterisk, and I did see a couple of people mention this in the chat. Yes, there's Keith Rivers in there too that could be in this discussion, but I think we saw enough from him. He had kind of the one big injury. I think we kind of saw enough from him to kind of say, yeah, he just didn't have it. And then there's also David Pollock, but he was more of kind of an edge rusher type of guy. He was another guy that unfortunately suffered a major injury. So those are other guys in there. I'm going to say Spikes, man. And I'm going to say Spikes because that in terms of tenacity, in terms of leadership, in terms of productivity, that was the Ray Lewis that this team was looking for. Plug up the middle. Obviously probably would never have been, and it proved based on his career, but was never going to be the Ray Lewis, but he could have been a very productive player in this defense, especially in the early years when they needed more stability and more, their early years were, let up points and yards, but get those big turnovers. I think Spikes would have stabilized that. I saw someone in here saying they thought Spikes would have been a Hall of Famer. I don't know about that, but Spikes would have been a Hall of Famer with the Bengals. I saw, just talking about some more of these guys, Michael Myers. Imagine Burfict before all these new rules when players could tee off on you. And Sean Blankenship mentioned Burfict in the 80s and 90s. He was that kind of linebacker for sure. It was Jason Von Stein that said if Spikes stayed with the Bengals, he would have been a Hall of Famer.
It's not like leaving the Bengals, diminished his chance of making the Hall of Fame though, because he still had a really good career after the Bengals. Right.
I think it's just unfortunately he bounced around to teams, and he seemed to come on a team when they didn't make the playoffs and left, and then that team made the playoffs like right after he left.
Yeah.
Whether that's an indictment of him or whatever, I don't know. But so he didn't really get the postseason experience, but he would have probably had some of that with Cincinnati in those early years had he stayed.
That's true.
Probably would have been through some of those better years, those early Palmer years, those really good years. He and Simmons, you mentioned Brian Simmons, a vastly underrated player with the Cincinnati Bengals. He and Simmons worked very, very well together. Their skill sets complemented each other in their first couple of years. So that is something to kind of take into consideration as well. Obviously, you keep Spikes. You don't really need draft Thurman and all that kind of stuff. But to me, I think it's Spikes. And for you, you're saying Thurman. And I don't think there's a wrong answer here. And who knows? Perfect. Even though he missed time again this year, he could come back and play like a Pro Bowl player. He played pretty decent last week against the Dolphins, so we'll see. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. You can get this show on iTunes. You can get it on YouTube, CincyJungle.com, Art19. You can get it on Stitcher and the Google Play apps. So get the show. We appreciate the support. We appreciate all the live questions. As I mentioned, we're taking texts at the moment. On our live line, 949-542-6241. So definitely shoot us a text. We'll try and get some calls here. We're just running up against time because we got a lot to get to. Quickly, John, I guess let's try and recap what the hell happened last Sunday. Once again, Cincinnati had a different kind of comeback against the Falcons, right? They were kind of going toe to toe. It was just kind of score for score for score. Yeah, there's a couple of holding the opposition to no points and all that kind of stuff. But for the most part, especially in that first half, it was like a toe to toe game, right? This was a different kind of comeback. This was you play like absolute garbage for 2.5 quarters, and literally every facet of the game was not working. They were getting gouged early in the run game. They couldn't get any kind of semblance of rhythm on offense. The special teams had a blocked field goal and a punt return touchdown with like less than a half a minute left in the half, a 70-yard return. That's inexcusable. Then you come out and you're like, okay, you get the ball at half. Okay, but now they've had time to regroup. Let's get this together. They come out and put forth probably the worst possible 3-and-out series on offense that you could go out there with after how you played in the first half. I guess I'm trying to figure out a question here, but I mean, what was the biggest catalyst in this comeback? Was it Andy Dalton? Was it Joe Mixon? Was it the defense clamping up and making adjustments that way? Lot of fingers to point at, both on the positive and negative, but I'm trying to sit here and say that's the person responsible for this comeback, and I don't know who that is.
Yeah, it just felt, it might be because I was hungover watching the game, but it just felt strange to watch, because like it was the game that both Burfict and Mixon were returning, and they are, kind of like the heart and soul of both sides of the ball. They're the guys who kind of gets everybody going. They kind of feed off their energy. And we saw none of that in the first quarter and a half. And obviously, to Burfict's point, it was his first game back all year. I don't think he was out of shape. He kind of collapsed down on a question before the game, like early in the week, like, I'm in shape, like I've been practicing. But obviously, he's had troubles, getting back into football shape once he comes back from suspension. But just that energy on defense wasn't quite there, even though they were doing a pretty good job of containing the Dolphins offense. And obviously they weren't getting any help from the Bengals offense. And that was because, the running game just wasn't kind of working, and they were kind of forcing it with Mixon, trying to get that energy going, and it just kind of wasn't happening. So it was around the middle of the third quarter where Mixon finally started to get a little bit of a groove. They obviously didn't get that crazy Mixon to Dalton touchdown until the beginning of the fourth quarter. But it was kind of towards like the end of the third quarter where they finally started getting sustained drives on offense and picking up what the defense was giving them. Obviously, the special teams issues, the drastic special teams issues were a major hindrance and could have easily put the game away. But I just think that it was around that time when both Burfict, kind of lit his spark under the defense, and Mixon lit his spark under the offense, and things kind of clicked. And like they kind of just like woke up saying, "Hey, wait a minute, we're a 3-1 team. We're one of the best teams in the NFL. Let's start playing like it before it's too late." And things just kind of exploded. And unfortunately for the Dolphins, it just kind of ran to a train wreck like in the final 20 minutes of the game. And it was just it was as bizarre to see as it was the first 40 minutes, where it was just like what exactly is going on here?
Yeah. If I'm a Dolphins fan, I don't even know what I want. I mean, yeah. I would have been like, what is happening here? I want to talk about this guy because he's been, and I like what you said, first of all, about Mixon and Burfict being kind of the catalysts, if you will, in terms of, leadership and all that kind of stuff. I said this in a post I wrote this week for Cincy Jungle, that they're the emotional catalysts. Yeah, AJ Green might be more talented than Joe Mixon in terms of being on that side of the football. Yes, Geno Atkins might be more talented than Vontaze Burfict on that side of the ball. But in terms of rallying the troops and in terms of, getting guys revved up, those two guys seem to be the guys that everybody else looks to. There's a bunch of others. Drake Kirkpatrick's one of them, and there are some others. But I look to those two. Now, I want to talk about Michael Johnson for a second because he has been a fan favorite whipping boy. Mm-hmm. I thought in limited snaps, touchdown play aside, which was gigantic, but touchdown play aside, I thought he played pretty well. He had a critical tackle for loss late. Mm-hmm. He had 3 total tackles. Have you now? I don't want to throw you under the bus and say, "Oh, you're this big Michael Johnson hater" or whatever. But have you softened up a little bit in terms of, hey, this guy still brings some worth? I think he's in his 11th season, 10th season, 9th with the Bengals, and the old dog can still learn some new tricks and still help out this team. Obviously, we saw what Hubbard could do. He's a hustler, and he's got a high motor, and he makes big plays when he's out there. But are you still saying, you know what, Michael Johnson still has a productive niche on this team? Yeah,
and I predicted that Johnson wasn't going to be a part of the final cuts because he brought that veteran leadership, and because the time Hubbard was still an unknown, Willis hasn't exactly taken that next step, and Johnson played awful in the preseason, and it's inexcusable, but he's obviously at the point where less snaps is better. And that's kind of the direction that they're going with the defense, because Hubbard is obviously, playing a more increased role as an inside pass rusher. Willis is taking a lot of snaps as an edge setter on the outside, and Johnson's just kind of part of that rotation. And it was that personal foul penalty on Johnson where I think it might have been a little bit of a wake-up call. And, hey, this might be my last year with a team that, I've done a lot in the community. I've set a great example in the locker room. I'm a leader, and I made a stupid mistake. And from that point on, he kind of turned it around in the snaps that he's given. And, he's not going to play the majority of the snaps of the game anymore. And that's perfectly fine, because in limited chances, he can sometimes give you a spark in the pass rush, rushing inside gaps, and he can still make plays in the running game because he's still, a decent athlete at 6'7", 270 pounds. And it was after that penalty where he made those couple tackles for loss, and then, he just made a play against awful backup left tackle in Sam Young, and almost sacked Ryan Tannehill. Ended up being the perfect spot for his first touchdown of his career. So it was kind of that moment that he kind of redeemed himself in the limited chances that he's getting. And yeah, and that's kind of like the niche and the role that we kind of expected him to, if he's going to succeed at all, that's how he's going to succeed. And just less is more for Johnson at this point. That's basically what we ended up seeing. And it was just kudos to him for turning it around after that sour moment.
Yeah, crazy sequence of events. And I mean, he's behind the quarterback and makes an interception. You just you don't hear that very often.
Yeah, it was behind the quarterback. He made an interception. It was Hubbard was in front of the quarterback. He recovered a fumble.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just the sequence of events in that game were unbelievable. And to kind of wrap this part up before we get to some listener questions, again, you can call us here in just a sec, 949-542-6241. We have limited time for a call or two, and then we've got some text to get to. So call us here in just a second. But just to kind of put this into perspective, John, and I think every Bengals fan feels this way. And I think it's an understandable way to feel in terms of you weigh optimism and, hey, they can come back from any kind of scenario at this point with still a lot of mistakes and still some big issues. I mean, how do you tip that scale in terms of like, hey, I'm really optimistic, or, I still – they got to win some other games coming down the pike, and they got to clean some stuff up before I kind of believe. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's why I'm excited about them playing on Sunday Night Football, because they can't hide forever. Like if they go into December of like 2 losses, they're obviously going to probably get flexed for a game then. So they're not going to go into the playoffs, completely unbeknownst to the primetime stage. And what better way to get preparation for the stage of the playoffs than playing the best team in your conference on the biggest stage of the week? That's a great way to really solidify what our expectations should be. Yes, they're talented. Yes, they seem to have a certain minor change of their culture and how they approach games, but all that is moot until they prove that they can do things that they haven't done before in this era, and that's win big games on the biggest stages. So it's fine to be optimistic, but it's also fine to say, hey, none of this kind of really matters until it does matter at the end of the season.
Yep. And like we said, they've already done a lot this year already in 5 short games to show us quite a bit of how they've changed as a team. These next 2 weeks will also tell us a lot, like you said. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I'm Anthony Cosenza. He's John Sheeran. We had Brian Davis from Behind the Steel Curtain on with us earlier to help preview the Steelers game. We've talked about the Dolphins game, and we've talked about some Bengals past linebackers and who was the best in the what could have been, I guess, type of category. So give us your thoughts on that. We're going to get out of here with some listener questions. You can give us a call. We'll try and get to you, 949-542-6241, 949-542-6241. And wouldn't you know it, we have a call. And 1 second. Hey, this is the Orange Black Insider. Who's this?
Hey, this is Fatal Content, man. Miami Bengal. How you doing?
What's going on, brother? For John, you may not know, but Fatal Content was a guy that loyal Bengal fan and a guy that listened to another podcast I was on religiously, called in, and was always an active listener. So I'm glad you have migrated to our show, my friend. How have you been?
Oh man, I've been good. It was an easy migration. I saw someone tweeted me. Actually, I didn't even know the show was going on. Someone tweeted me a few days or weeks ago and told me you need to get back on the show. I've been taking calls. I was like, oh, I didn't even know. So glad to be back, man.
Well, good to have you back. Good to hear from you. Been a little while here. Before we get to your question or comment, we're going to ask you the question of the night, and I don't know if you were here when we asked it. Basically, it's kind of who would have been the best in the what could have been linebacker, and we asked if Taquito Spikes had stayed from 2003 on, if Odell Thurman kept his nose clean and stayed with the Bengals for a while, or Vontaze Burfict if he had stayed away from injury and suspension issues. Who do you think would have been the productive Bengal linebacker, bar none?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I have to say Odell Thurman because of what he could have been, and he actually is out. It's hard to go about that because he still has a load ahead of him to be that guy. So I'd have to subtract him for that. But if it comes down to it, I agree with you guys. Odell, for the same reasons you guys said, I won't long with it.
Yeah, and that's What could have been with that guy? Jeez. Well, what's on your mind tonight? What can we answer for you?
Just a couple things to keep it short, man. I think this team, like we always say, to me, what they do now doesn't really matter in terms of honestly in the grand scheme of things. I think the playoffs is what's really the answer with these guys. We've seen this before, but I will give them the credit that they're turning corners. They're answering questions. I mean, Andy Dalton under pressure this weekend where he could have folded and folded the tent, so to say. He came back and made some throws in the grass, scrambled out of the pocket, showed a lot of toughness as he has all year. Also, we're slaying demons. We're having a lot of comebacks on the primetime thing. I think we're finally starting to quiet that down now. This Kansas City game would be huge. But I think they're starting to slay some demons up into the playoffs. I think they're at least proving themselves for now. But to me, the playoffs is what matters.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And like I said, these are two huge weeks coming up here against the Steelers and Chiefs, respectively. And two big games, two big litmus tests for the Bengals to really prove kind of where they're at. And, you know, it's kind of like my co-host John said, at some point you got to start winning these games in order to be real. I mean, even the people that are ranking them high and all this kind of stuff, what's the asterisk they always give at this point right now? Well, you know, they can't win the big game. They can't win the big game. So I think this team, more than anything, aside from talent and showing some intestinal fortitude, I think they're showing, you know, that they're not phased very easily. They're not, you know, they can figure it out. They can come back and in a lot of different scenarios and get a win. Your prediction for this week's game before we get you out of here, Fatal?
Oh, you know, I want to put a bullet in front of it, man. I kind of want to go Bengals 27-13.
Ooh.
I want to go, but
ooh.
I think I'll go a little bit more realistic. I think I'll say 27-20.
All right.
I would be shocked 27-13. I want that, but I think 27-20.
All right. You heard it. You heard it from Fatal. Good to hear from you again, man. Hope those boys from the U are treating you all right.
Oh man, now that you bring that up, I'll just be quick. It was a great weekend. I was going to say that because it was a double comeback and back-to-back days for me when it seemed bleak. It was amazing. It was a great weekend.
Well, that's a good weekend for you then. Yeah. Awesome. Well, good to hear from you. Call back anytime, and hope you can join us weekly again, Fatal. Good to hear from you, buddy.
All right, man. You guys done a great job. Have a good one.
All right, thanks. Who freaking dare. That's Fatal Content giving us a call on the Orange and Black Insider line. John, you know, he's been a long-time listener, so he said in the YouTube chat that he wanted to call in, and I hadn't heard from him for a long time, so definitely wanted to hear from him. I want to get to some of these texts here. Again, we had one yesterday, John. People are so
you guys got to chill, man. Anthony's just living his life outside the podcast.
Hey, living the best life, bro. Well, to be honest, this is from someone from Hawaii. So we had someone from Miami just calls in, and then we've got someone on the other side from Hawaii. So Hawaii's mellow. They got a lot of time to think about stuff, hang out. It's from and by the way, I was in Maui this summer, so I love Hawaii. I'm a big Hawaii guy. Chi Hude from Hawaii, and this is a good one I think for you specifically, John. Can you talk about the impact Alex Van Pelt has had on Andy Dalton? And there's a reason, he says there's a reason why Aaron Rodgers wasn't so happy to see him go in Green Bay. Aloha. Everybody's talking about Andy Dalton's uptick in play, rightfully so. Everybody's talking about Bill Lazor and how he's putting Andy Dalton in a position to succeed. Nobody is talking about Alex Van Pelt, and I think that is a gigantic get and a gigantic piece of the puzzle. Am I wrong about that, John?
No, I don't think so. And I don't gawk at the fact that the greatest thrower of the football all time is upset about losing his quarterback coach when he's like 33 years old. But I think there was some type of impact that Rodgers had with Van Pelt. And the biggest thing with Dalton is this. I saw him like on Twitter, like Dalton's stats against the blitz. His pass rating is like top 2 in the league, and that's impressive and all. But that's not anything new with Dalton specifically. He's always been good at identifying blitzes pre-snap, going to the hot reads quick, getting the ball out quickly, and that leads to deficiency. The problem with Dalton was dealing under, when the pocket kind of collapses, when it's not a blitz, when it's like a 4 or 3 man rush, and that comes to the testament of extending plays, getting your feet reset after dodging rushes, and that's something that Aaron Rodgers to the Packers is so great at. And that's what makes him such a great player, is that he's able to extend plays, going to his left, going to his right, kind of makes his offensive line look better because he's able to avoid a lot of those sacks that some quarterbacks don't. And that's the biggest improvement that we've seen from Dalton. And that could easily be attributed to Van Pelt's, techniques of, teaching him better techniques to face pressure, to face, 4 or 3 man blitzes, when they're trying to contain him, and just making plays on his own, because he's done a fantastic job this year compared to the first 7 years of his career, and that very well could be a testament to Van Pelt.
Great observation in terms of Dalton under pressure and what he's been able to do. I see a lot more accuracy on the run. I see a lot more stuff on rollouts and stuff like that. I don't think that's all Alex Van Pelt. I think that's obviously Lazor kind of playing to strengths and potentially weaknesses up front on the offensive line. But he looks comfortable. Yeah. Dalton does, and he looks. I think we can look at Bill Lazor a lot for sure, but I think Alex Van Pelt is a guy that definitely has had an impact. We've got one more call, and then we're gonna get out of here. It's from our good buddy. Terrell, right? Terrell, how are you, sir?
How you doing, man?
Good to hear from you again. What's on your mind?
Just real quick about this week game and every game. Basically, I think if they can play their game, I think they can actually kind of like they're doing now. I really do think this is the time. I think they need to stop letting them bully them, stop letting them embarrass them. It's time for us to embarrass them. Like, I really do think so. And real quick about the Dolphins game, I was actually at the Dolphins game.
Oh, nice.
I don't know, y'all saying it?
What?
I was actually at the Dolphins game.
Yeah.
And I don't know if y'all guys seen it, but Jesse Bates was telling Drake Kirkpatrick signals and telling him what to do and get him in good position.
Interesting.
Let you know, and I think he should be like first defensive rookie of the year.
Yeah, so by a lot of metrics, and I'll let John chime in here in just a second too. By a lot of metrics, Jesse Bates is one of the top. If you like Pro Football Focus and their scoring, he's one of the better rookies this year, up there with like Derwin James and all kinds of guys.
I mean, this guy, he's playing like Earl Thomas, I think. I really do think so. Like, he's playing like that. I mean, when I was at the game, I seen him was telling Drake Kirkpatrick telling him to get position, all types of stuff. I was like, man, this guy's a smart guy. Like, but I think he's up for defensive rookie year. And I was just let you guys talk about whatever's going on, and I was just letting you know about this week's game or last week's game.
Well, you were in person. You were in person for a hell of a game there, Terrell. I hope you had a good time and enjoyed the Bengals comeback win. We're gonna get you off the air here and talk a little bit more about Jesse Bates. Appreciate you calling in as usual. Enjoy this Sunday, my friend.
Oh, thank you too.
All right. That was good friend Terrell calling the show. I wanted to ask you about that because you're a bit more of a film guru than I am, John. It's funny to me, he mentions Earl Thomas and maybe even Eric Berry and stuff as early on what Jesse Bates has looked like. To me, it's been very, very quiet, but he's had the couple of interceptions, and I think part of it is because the Bengals have let up some points in big plays.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen some confusion a little bit back there, but I that's interesting that he noted that he saw him telling Dre where to go. I also saw guys go up late in the game, pre-snap to Vontaze Burfict to get confirmations on the read. And I'm talking secondary guys and other guys. I think 2 or 3 players at one time came up to Burfict to make sure they had the right read.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously noting Burfict's football IQ and how he can diagnose plays. Your thoughts on Jesse Bates, your thoughts on Burfict's value because of his football IQ?
Yeah, and the Bates is, his leadership qualities, his football intangibles. It's kind of like the unsung reason of why they were so confident with giving him George Iloka's spot. It wasn't just because he has more range and better ball skills than Iloka to handle a single high safety alignment, but also because just at only 21 years old, he's actually turning 22. When we're recording this, he's turning 22 in a couple hours. So at 21 years old, he came in immediately. Apparently took the reins as one of the leaders in the secondary, as one of the youngest players on the whole team. And just like Terrell said, he's getting guys in position and he's diagnosing plays immediately and he's making plays on the ball. And, for the lack of success that they've had in terms of giving up a lot of plays in the passing game, Bates hasn't really been targeted that much. And that's because he's able to cover so much ground and he's able to take away, deep crossing routes, and he's able to cover a lot of ground in very minimal time. So not only has Bates, produced on the number sheets, but he's also produced with his brain, and that's very important. And that's kind of why they've decided to go with him over Iloka. And when it comes to Burfict, it's not just the energy that we talked about, but it's also the fact that he can minimize his lack of athleticism with the way that he can read plays in an instant and make breaks on the ball. And if he had the athleticism of Luke Kuechly, he'd be right up there with Luke Kuechly, but he doesn't. But because he has the intangibles and the read and react skills of an all-pro player, that allows him to be in such great positions. That's why people kind of rally behind him, to make sure they're in the right spot. He's like the dad out there, basically, even if he makes a few bonehead mistakes. But it was definitely notable towards the end of the game. Perfect kind of kept everybody together. He kept that defense strong because they've only given up like 10 points all game. So they had a pretty good game. Now it's because Burfict kind of gelled it all together, and they made some crucial plays in the run game and the pass game because of him getting back into the swing of things, and that was great to see as well.
Yeah, and we talked about last week how when Burfict came back from an extended period to start the season before, it was against the Steelers. He had a monster game against the Steelers and helped the Bengals get that win. Luckily now the Bengals, Burfict has a week to knock off the rust, kind of get used to things as we go into the game against Pittsburgh, and he's not traveling. So he should be primed for a pretty decent game, I think, and I would hope. So yeah, good stuff from Bates, good stuff from Vontaze, and I think interestingly enough, and you can call it a coincidence or not, but the Bengals defense was giving up 28 points a game going into Sunday. Kickoff or a punt return notwithstanding and all that stuff, they gave up 10 points upon Vontaze Burfict's return against a team that was 3-1. Yeah, maybe not the most prolific offense in the league, but it says something. It says something to his value, and we'll see if that trend continues going forward. We're going to get out of here, and I just want to give some final thoughts, and you can comment on this. John. As you and I know, this is a labor of love. We do this for the site. We do this for the fans. It's not something that it's not my day job. It's something else that we do because we love the Bengals and we love the fans and the readers. And every once in a while, you get some comments that really pep you up and really make you feel good about what you're doing. And that was tonight. And I just want to throw this out there. D'Angelo Hankerson, welcome to the jungle, which is a very long name, but a good one. He writes, follow this podcast. This is the best podcast in our live YouTube chat. And then he says, Carl Benson follows it up with, these, quote, cats do a good job. I like that. And he said, yeah, they do a great job, honestly. So very, very much appreciated from you. And then, John, you got Andrew Seiler calls it the favorite part of his week. And he follows it up with, John, you are my hero and father. I'm glad you are now a regular on here. I'm assuming he's talking about you. Yeah. You're the Darth Vader. But we appreciate the comments, guys. Seriously. We do this. Yeah, we do it for us, and we do it because we're fans, but we also do it for you. That's why we love hearing from you on the text line and call line. Sorry we couldn't get to more tonight. We just ran out of time. But, John, in case you didn't see that in the YouTube chat, I wanted to share that with you. I thought that was very cool to hear from some of that, as well as getting some old faces back, like John from Kentucky and Fatal Content from previous podcasts that I've been on, having them follow. So, I don't know. I just wanted to share that with you, which I thought was very flattering.
I'm just grateful that these guys are willing to listen to 90 minutes of this podcast because it's a long time and it's a lot of content, but we work hard doing it. And just a quick note from me, whatever happens this on Sunday, I asked for the team to be the bigger man. In the comment section, whether if you're on like Steelers, SB Nation side, if you're on Twitter, just be civil. All right, we don't need to make this any worse. And I have confidence that our listeners are the good guys, and they're not going to be the guys that rile people up. But be a good example online, interacting with Steelers fans, no matter what happens, because we don't obviously want to escalate things to make it any further. We want to make this better. We want to make this rivalry better in the best way possible. So just be the bigger person. Don't incite the conflict. Be the person to resolve it. And that's all I can ask.
Yeah, and we're not talking about getting up on our soapboxes about high and mighty and holier than thou. But I mean, there's also the facet of the people that go to the games. There's always just going to be jerks that go to the games either way, and all of that stuff. So just you don't want to be the guy on Twitter feeds that's involved in some weird fight in the stands and all that kind of stuff. Just try and enjoy the game. I know there are people out there that are just jerks regardless, and especially when they get some beers in their system, it exacerbates it. But just try and be like John said. Just try and enjoy this game. And this has been an enjoyable season in general. A much more enjoyable season than the last two. So. Enjoy the ride and enjoy Sunday. And regardless of the outcome, there's still a lot of games left, including another one against Pittsburgh that the Bengals could potentially steal from the Steelers later on. Just real quick, again, Kevin Evans, my favorite podcast and Bengals show. Thanks so much. Matthew Wayne Smith, John is all over, killing it. Yeah, you are all over, buddy. Jason Von Stein, great show, guys. Always a pleasure listening. And Brandon Batchelor, great podcast. I've been listening for almost 2 years now. That stuff is very cool. We're not saying this on the air to pat our own backs. We're saying this because we appreciate it. And we're just glad that you guys like John said, we're glad you like hearing us talk for an hour and a half about the Bengals, and we like getting you involved. Again, this is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. You can get it on Stitcher, iTunes, YouTube, CincyJungle.com. You can also get it on the Google Play app. Did I say iTunes? I think I said iTunes, but Art19 as well. There's so many. I always forget if I threw threw one in there or not. We're also on Twitter at BengalsOBI, so you can follow us on there and get all the content that you need, news, updates, analysis, commentary, opinions on CincyJungle.com. John and I are contributors there, and a lot of stuff coming up, especially it being Steelers week. Enjoy this Sunday coming up. Let's hope the Bengals come out with a win, 5-1, going into maybe an undefeated Chiefs team in Kansas City on Sunday night. And it's been a fun season, man. It's been a fun season. Thanks, John.
Let's keep it going.
All right. Thanks, everybody.